There is a sentence that has been spoken more times than any other sentence in human history. It has been whispered in the dark by people who had nothing left. It has been carved into stone. It has been tattooed onto my skin. It has been recited in hospitals, in prisons, in foxholes, by mothers sitting beside tiny beds, by soldiers with their faces pressed into the dirt. And almost every single person who has ever spoken it has been reading a version that was quietly, deliberately softened, not by accident, not by translation error, but because the men responsible for translating it in 1611 may have genuinely believed that the world was not ready for what the original Hebrew actually said. What I am about to show you is not a theory. It is not speculation dressed up in dramatic language. It is sitting right there in the ancient text, in the original words, waiting for anyone with the courage and the patience to look directly at it. And once you see it, you will understand why so many people have carried this psalm their entire lives, and still felt like something was missing. You will understand why the comfort felt real, but incomplete. You will understand why the words seemed to soothe the surface but never reached the wound underneath. And more than any of that, you will understand what David was actually declaring, and why that declaration is more radical, more protective, and more staggering than anything the familiar English version ever communicated. I want to be honest with you about something before we go any further. I have spent over 40 years with this psalm. I have read it beside deathbeds. I have read it in rooms so heavy with grief that the air itself felt thick. I have read it in my own darkest hours when the words felt like a rope thrown down into a very deep pit. And for most of those 40 years, I believed I understood it. I was certain I understood it. Then an old teacher, a man who had survived things I will not describe, sat me down and said something I have never forgotten. He said, "Are you reading David's words with someone else's eyes? Go back to the Hebrew. Go back to what David actually wrote. Do not flinch from what you find there." That conversation changed the entire shape of my understanding, and today I am passing it directly to you. The psalm opens with a line so familiar that most people hear it the way they hear their own name, automatically without registering what it actually means. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." In Hebrew, the line is Adonai ro'i lo exar, and that word exar, the word translated as shall not want, carries a weight that the English completely dissolves. The root of exar does not mean to desire something, to wish for something, to feel the absence of something comfortably. The root means to be cut, to be severed, to be separated from what you need in a way that threatens your existence. David is not making a gentle, grateful observation about contentment. David is making a covenant declaration. He is saying, "Because the Lord is the one shepherding me, I will never be cut off from what I need to survive." That is a fundamentally different statement. One is a quiet hope. The other is a warrior's proclamation of protection. One is a feeling. The other is a legal, spiritual, binding guarantee that has been activated by the presence of the shepherd. The moment you read Exar through its actual root, the entire opening of this psalm transforms. You are not reading a sigh of relief. You are reading a declaration of covenant warfare against lack itself. Now I want to tell you about a man. I will call him Michael, because what I am about to share is private in the most human of ways. Michael came to me during one of the worst periods of his life. He had lost his business. His marriage was fracturing under the pressure of financial collapse. He had not slept a full night in 3 weeks. He sat across from me with the kind of emptiness in his eyes that I have only seen in people who have been fighting for a very long time with nothing left in reserve. And he told me that he had recited this psalm every single morning for nearly 4 years. Every morning, without exception. And he felt absolutely nothing. He looked at me and he said, "I am doing everything right. Why isn't this working?" And I asked him one question. I said, "When you say the words, 'I shall not want,' what do you believe you are saying?" He thought about it for a long moment. He said, "I think I am saying that I trust God will provide for me eventually." I said, "You are not saying that. You are saying that you are protected by covenant from being cut off from what you need, not eventually, but now. The protection is already active. The moment you acknowledge the presence of the shepherd, the covenant is already in motion. You have been asking for a promise that was already given. You have been waiting for a door to open that was never closed." That conversation shifted something deep in Michael. And within days of understanding what he had actually been declaring for 4 years, A call came. An unexpected door opened. He wept when he told me. Not because of the door, but because he finally understood what he had been carrying all along without ever really reading it. But the Hebrew does not stop its revelations at the first verse. Not even close. Because there is something encoded in the structure of this psalm that almost no one who recites it has ever been told. In the opening verses, David speaks about God in the third person. He says, "He makes me lie down. He leads me. He restores my soul." He is describing a relationship with the divine from a certain spiritual distance, the way a person might describe a great leader they admire but have not yet met face to face. And then, without warning, in the fourth verse, the grammar breaks. David stops saying he and begins saying you. He says, "For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." This shift is unmistakable in the Hebrew. It is not a poetic accident. It is not a stylistic variation for rhythm or flow. It is a deliberate, dramatic movement from description to encounter, from speaking about God to speaking directly to God. And here is what should stop you cold. This shift, this most intimate, most direct moment in the entire psalm, happens not at a mountaintop, not in a moment of triumph or abundance or celebration. It happens in the deepest, darkest, most terrifying passage of the entire text. The grammatical encounter with the divine occurs at the exact moment David enters the valley. The rabbinic tradition teaches something extraordinarily beautiful about this. There is a teaching, ancient, layered, hard-earned, that says the presence of the Holy One rushes toward a soul that is walking in its darkest hour the way a parent runs toward a child who is crying in fear. The valley does not signal absence. The valley is where the encounter becomes most direct, most unmediated, most intimate. David is telling us that the architecture of darkness is not a house you live in. It is a corridor you pass through. And the shepherd walks every step of that corridor beside you. Not in the abstract sense of theological reassurance, but close enough that the grammar itself shifts to direct address. Close enough to say you. This matters enormously for anyone who has ever felt that their suffering was evidence of divine withdrawal, that the difficulty meant God had stepped back, that the silence meant abandonment. Because what the Hebrew structure of this psalm reveals is the exact opposite. Darkness is not where the presence retreats. Darkness is where it draws closest. The valley is where description becomes conversation. The valley is where theology becomes encounter. And if you have been walking through your own valley believing that the silence meant you were alone, I want you to hear what David understood. You were never more accompanied than in that moment. You simply did not know what was available to you because no one ever told you what the original Hebrew actually said. Now I need to walk you into the fourth verse itself, because the word at its center is the key that unlocks something most translations have quietly locked away. The line in English reads, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." That phrase, shadow of death, comes from a single Hebrew word, psalmavet. And the scholars who worked on the King James Bible in 1611 made a choice. They divided it into two pieces, shadow and death, and called it the shadow of death. It sounds sober. It sounds philosophical. It sounds like a meditation on mortality. But many of the greatest Hebrew scholars who worked both before and after 1611 understood psalmavet as a single compound word, a proper designation, a real name for a specific and terrifying kind of darkness. Not the shadow cast by death, the darkness itself. The darkness that exists before death arrives. The darkness of complete desolation, of total spiritual and emotional abandonment, of walking through a place so forsaken that even light seems to have made its decision to leave. David is not describing a cemetery. He is not offering a philosophical reflection on the human condition. He is describing something a living soul can walk through right now, today, in this lifetime. A place of such profound inner desolation that it feels like everything you ever believed about yourself and your life has been dismantled. And he is saying even there, even in psalmavet, even in the place that no English translation has quite been willing to name at full strength, even there, the rod and the staff are with you. Even there, exar does not apply. Even there, you are not cut off. There is a midrash, a rabbinic teaching, about David himself in that valley. Not a valley as a symbol, an actual valley. When his own son Absalom turned the entire kingdom against him, David was forced to flee Jerusalem on foot. Not in a chariot, not surrounded by his royal guard. On foot, in the dust, his head covered, his sandals removed as a sign of mourning, while people who had once cheered for him cursed him openly in the streets. He had lost the throne, the loyalty of his family, his dignity before an entire nation, everything that had defined him and his place in the world. And according to the rabbinic tradition, it was during that period, during the walking, during the exile, during the hours of humiliation and desolation, that the deepest spiritual insights of his psalms crystallized. He was not writing from a palace. He was writing from the dirt. The green pastures of the second verse were not visible to him when he wrote them. He was in the wilderness. He wrote about still waters from a place of profound thirst. He wrote the words, "You are with me," at the very moment when the presence of God seemed most completely hidden. And that is not weakness dressed up in beautiful language. That is the highest exercise of faith that a human being is capable of. Faith is not the ability to believe in the goodness of the divine when everything is comfortable and clear. Faith is the declaration of that goodness from the bottom of the valley, when everything in your circumstances is screaming the opposite. David did not wait until the valley was behind him to write this psalm. He wrote it from inside the valley. He wrote it as a man still walking, still in motion, still refusing to stop. And that motion, that refusal to stand still in the darkness and call it home, is what the Hebrew of the fourth verse demands. The word Gamlech does not mean while I dwell in the valley. It means even as I walk through, even as I am moving. The valley is a passage, not a residence. The shepherd does not leave you in the darkness. The shepherd walks you out of it, but you have to keep moving. If you have felt the valley in your own life, if you are in it right now, I want you to stay with me through what comes next. Because what David encodes in the fifth verse is the piece that most translations have softened in a way that robs it of its full explosive force. What I'm about to show you will change how you understand the nature of divine provision, and it will change what you believe is possible in the middle of opposition, not after it ends. Stay with me. There is a verse in this psalm that most people recite as a beautiful image of hospitality. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. They picture a dinner, a quiet meal. God serves food with gentle grace, while the enemies watch from a distance, perhaps with envy, perhaps simply as witnesses to someone else's peace. It is a comforting image. It is also, according to the Hebrew, significantly smaller than what David actually wrote. The word translated as prepare in that verse is ta'arok, from the root ayin resh kaf. And that root carries connotations that have nothing to do with setting a polite dinner table. The same root appears elsewhere in the Hebrew scriptures to describe armies being arranged for battle, military formations being deployed, strategic positioning before confrontation. Ta'arok does not simply mean to place something. It means to organize, to assemble, to deploy with deliberate, tactical intention. David is not saying that God kindly serves him a meal while his enemies hover uncomfortably nearby. David is saying that God organizes, assembles, and strategically deploys provision for him, at full visibility, in plain sight, in the direct presence of every force that has positioned itself against his life. The table is not a comfort. The table is a military maneuver. The blessing is a formation. The provision is being deployed like a general deploys an army, with precision, with purpose, with the specific intention of demonstrating power over opposition. God is not waiting for your enemies to leave before blessing you. The blessing is being organized and deployed in the presence of the opposition. The table is set while they are watching. Your breakthrough does not come when the resistance stops. It comes in direct view of the resistance. That is what David wrote. And that is what 1611 made quieter than it needed to be. If you have been waiting, if there is something specific in your life that feels impossibly delayed, impossibly far from where you are, I want you to hear this. The Hebrew does not say the table will be prepared. It describes an action that is ongoing, deliberate, and militarily intentional. The organizing has already begun. The deployment is already in motion. And it is happening in the presence of whatever is standing against you, not after it moves. This is not a call to passive waiting. This is an invitation to stand in the awareness that provision is being actively assembled on your behalf by a shepherd who does not retreat in the face of opposition, who positions the blessing exactly where the opposition can see it most clearly. And then there is the final verse of this psalm, which contains a word that almost every English translation renders far too gently. David writes that goodness and mercy, in Hebrew, tov v'chesed, will follow him all the days of his life. The word translated as follow is yirdafuni, and yirdafuni does not mean to follow the way a shadow follows, passively, without urgency. Yirdafuni means to pursue, to chase, to go after something with determination and relentless forward motion. The same root is used elsewhere in Scripture for the pursuit of enemies in battle, the kind of pursuit that does not stop, does not slow, does not give up until it catches what it is running after. David is saying that the goodness and the covenant love of God are not waiting for him to earn them, to achieve them, to finally do enough to deserve them. They are running after him. They are in pursuit, even when he is running away, even when he is in the valley, even when he has made mistakes that have cost him everything. The chesed, the unconditional, covenant-bound, faithful love, is not sitting still waiting to be found. It is hunting him down, and it is hunting you down, right now. Not when you get yourself together, not when you finally believe enough or pray enough or have earned enough. The pursuit is already in motion. You do not chase the blessing chases you. That is what the Hebrew says, and it is almost unbearably more powerful than the quiet pastoral image most people have been handed. Now I want to give you something concrete, because everything I have taught you means nothing if it stays inside your head and never changes the way you actually encounter this text. What I am about to describe is rooted in a practice that my teachers handed down to me, and their teachers handed down to them. A tradition of reading sacred texts with directed, fully awake intention, what the Hebrew calls kavanah. The soul of this practice is simple. When you read these words, you are not reciting them, you are entering them. Tonight, before you sleep, find a quiet place and give it 15 minutes of complete, undivided presence. Read the psalm slowly, once. But as you read, hold 3 specific awarenesses alive in your mind simultaneously. When you say the words, "I shall not want," remember what XR actually means. Say inwardly, "I will not be cut off from what I need." Not eventually. Now. When you reach the 4th verse and you enter the valley, make the shift that David made. Let the words "you are with me" become a direct address, not a description of someone's theology, not a recollection of a doctrine. A direct, live, first-person conversation with the presence that is already in the room with you. And when you reach the 5th verse and the table, see it not as hospitality, but as deployment, as a military act of provision being organized on your behalf in full view of everything that has been working against you. After you read, sit in silence for 3 minutes, not asking, not listing your needs, simply resting in the awareness of the shepherd's presence. The Talmud teaches in Tractate Barakot that there is a level of prayer that transcends petition entirely, a level where the soul simply rests in the closeness of the divine. That silence after the reading is itself the still waters of the 2nd verse. It is where restoration happens. It is where the text stops being information and becomes experience. Then, at the end of those 3 minutes, speak one specific thing aloud, not a vague request. One named specific need. A relationship that needs to be healed, a door that needs to open, a weight that needs to lift. Speak it with the certainty of someone who knows that the table is already being organized for exactly that. Because according to what David wrote in Hebrew, it is. Do this for 7 consecutive nights. 7 because in the structure of the Torah, 7 days is the unit of creation. And there is a principle in rabbinic thinking that when we align our practice with the rhythm of creation, we invite creative restoration into our situation, not by magic, by the progressive reorientation of your spiritual attention toward what has already been promised. Before I leave you, there is one last thing I need to say, and I say it as your teacher and as someone who has walked through his own valleys in the years of this work. The reason so many people live in the valley indefinitely is not because God has abandoned them there. It is because they have accepted a version of this psalm that makes the valley feel permanent. When you hear the shadow of death, it sounds like a place, like a landscape you are supposed to accept as your address. But the Hebrew says, while I walk through, while I am in motion, while I am still going forward. Psalmavet is a passage, not a dwelling. The shepherd does not leave you inside it. The shepherd walks every step of it beside you, closer in that corridor than anywhere else, and then leads you out the other side. But you have to be walking. David was fleeing Jerusalem in exile and humiliation, and he kept moving. The restoration came because he did not stop. He walked through Tzalmavet, and goodness chased him all the way to the other side. It is chasing you too, even now, even in whatever corridor you are currently walking, even in the silence that has felt like abandonment. The shepherd has not moved. The covenant has not been suspended. The table is being organized, the pursuit has not slowed, and the darkness you are in is not the sign of distance. It is the place where, if you lift your eyes and make the shift from he to you will find the presence closer to your face than it has ever been in any moment of comfort or abundance or ease. May everything you are carrying right now be met with a provision you did not see coming. May the corridor you are walking end in a light that is more than you asked for, and may you walk through it, not around it, through it, knowing that not one step of it, not even the darkest step, was ever taken alone. If this teaching reached something in you that needed to be reached, something that has been quietly hurting or quietly waiting, share it with one person who is in their valley right now. You may not know how close to the edge they are. You may not know that hearing the word exar, hearing that they cannot be cut off, is the exact thing standing between them and giving up. Pass it forward. That act of passing it forward is itself a table being set. It is itself provision being deployed. And subscribe, because every week I bring teachings like this, rooted in the deepest wells of this ancient tradition, built not to make you feel better for a moment, but to fundamentally change the way you read, the way you pray, and the way you walk through the valleys that are still ahead.